So hello and welcome to Transforming Districts and Schools for Sustainable Systemic Change, Facilitating Inclusive Instruction for Students with Extensive Support Needs, presented by the amazing Debbie and Diane. I'm Kristen Brooks, Executive Director for the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, and I am thrilled to be your moderator alongside Celise Heron, Program Support Specialist for SIP, who's on the line for anything you may need throughout this session. So first, a few logistics. This session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the closed caption button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and the interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We'll ensure the ASL interpreter is spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presenter, so please make sure your volume is muted to avoid any background distractions while presenters are speaking. We encourage you to engage with others in the chat, and when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your beautiful smiling face. And with that, Debbie and Diane, I'll turn it over to you.
Debbie, we'll turn it over to you. Let you start.
I had to unmute because I was chatting in the chat. You know how I do. So,
interpreter speaking, would you all be able to slow down your speech just a little bit for the interpreter, please?
Yep, sorry.
Yes.
So hi, I'm Debbie Taub, and this is Diane Rindak, and we're going to talk to you about kind of systems change across multiple levels. So in the chat, or raise your hand, has anybody here ever been engaged in a systems change project or process that didn't actually work? Yes. Yes, I'm seeing some yeses. Still a work in progress. I love that. Sadly, yes. Yeah, it's a very common thing. And it's frustrating, right? It's time consuming, as someone just said. And it doesn't help us, right? It just sends us backwards and backwards. So we have done a lot of work with systems change. We worked with the TIES Center. And sorry, I got distracted by my ASL interpreter. I have to close that out. So effective system change requires that everybody involved has a clear understanding of the evidence and research base for inclusive instruction. It means that everybody has to have an understanding of the extent to which current education practices align with those research and evidence-based practices. It also requires a commitment from the stakeholder groups, and we mean across all levels, at the state, at the district, at the school, in the community. You need to have general and special education teachers. You have to have administrators, curriculum specialists, family members. And it has to be, if it's going to work and sustain, it has to be an intentional and systematic multi-year process, because the quick changes don't really change the system. They might improve practices for 1 or 2 classrooms or even a district, but they're not going to actually change the system. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share some tools to assist with that sustainable systemic change for inclusive instruction. We're going to share the key characteristics of those tools, the process for using it, and actually it's a couple of tools that we'll show. We're going to show the process for one, the use of the tool within a system change approach, and then feedback from users of the tool. So the first thing I wanted to share with you, or we wanted to share with you, as part of the TIES Center work, we built what we call an inclusive education roadmap. And if you go to the TIES Center webpage, which is, just so you can see it, www, oh, you don't even need the www, tiescenter.org. If you go there and click on topics, there's a whole bunch of resources. One of them under system change is the Inclusive Education Roadmap. What that does is it shows you the process for building sustainable change. And when we talk about sustainable change, we're specifically focusing on those students with extensive support needs, students with intellectual disabilities, sometimes autism. Typically, they're eligible for the alternate assessment based on alternate academic achievement standards. What we're looking to see in our change is that those students have more time in general education, that the instructional effectiveness in those classes is higher, that those students have engagement with general education curriculum and with peers, and that there's systemic support at the state and district level that helps make that change at the school level. So one of the things that we did, we had to create a series of tools for state, district, and school. And it had to have key characteristics. We knew from doing this work in the past, I mean, Diane's been doing it since forever.
Don't go there. Don't go there. I'm old. It's okay.
Old, no. But we knew from doing this work, we knew from implementation science research that if you're going to create sustainable change, it has to have research and evidence-based pieces. So when we built this tool, we knew it had to involve those features. It had to have multiple levels so that we ended up with a common understanding across all those levels of where your school is, or your district is, or your state is in relation to those evidence-based practices. It had to be focused on capacity building for sustainable systemic change. It's not enough to teach your teachers this year how to do inclusion. It has to be an ongoing thing. How do you onboard those new people? How do you have the resources to keep this going? We also know that change doesn't work if it's one size fits all. So we knew the tool had to have a context focus. And in addition to that, kind of parallel to that, it has to have system ownership. As I said before, if you try to do a one size fits all, it doesn't work. So it has to be something the system takes ownership for and does. We also knew that the tool had to lead to action planning. And based on our experiences, it really needs an external facilitator, somebody who's not part of the system to help prod and ask questions and get some clarity that sometimes the person in the system has trouble doing. So when we built this tool, and Diane will tell you all about how we did that, one of the things that we really looked at was the implementation drivers from the implementation implementation science research. And basically, if you haven't seen this before, it's a triangle. There's a driver on the left that says competency drivers, and that includes selection, training, coach, and coaching. There's a arrow on the right that says organization drivers, and it has systems intervention, facilitative administration, decision support data system. And then on the bottom is an arrow of leadership. Those three pieces have to work together. It's been interesting to me doing this work, how often transportation is named as one of the barriers. You have to have conversations with the transportation department about how do we make this work? What's happening right now that it can't work? One of the schools we worked in, we found that students who had extensive support needs were leaving school up to 45 minutes to an hour early. It's hard to be included in classes when you're not there at all. They were coming in late and leaving early due to bus schedules. So what needs to happen across all of those levels is what we're looking at. So before I turn it over to Diane, any questions? I appreciate Kevin calling out that there's excellent resources on the TIES Center website. I love that you guys have seen that. Great. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here. One thing that we want to emphasize when we're looking at, we're calling it the RISE, and the RISE stands for Reflecting on an Inclusive System of Education, being one system, not multiple systems. And the idea is to first get this common understanding of what are the research-based and evidence-based practices related to inclusive instruction, specifically, especially for students with extensive support needs. So all of this is based on a 1.5 to 2 years review of the literature, existing tools, and so forth. So bear with us with that. Next slide. To begin with, within the inclusive education roadmap that Debbie talked about, that is really, it calls for leadership teams at each of the levels that you're being engaged. So for instance, if you're at a district, having a district inclusive instruction leadership team that represents the different stakeholder groups, but with the purpose of them sharing information with their stakeholder groups, as well as having vertical communication, so that if you're working at the district level, you're having communication with the same type of team at a school that is implementing and engaged in this work, as well as with the State Department of Education, hopefully that is also engaged in this level of work. So they have a lot of responsibilities. To do that, we have these tools, and as we begin with the process of these tools, we come back to the frame of reference that you see on this page. We keep emphasizing that when we talk about all means all, specifically including students with extensive support needs. When we talk about placement, we're talking about placement in both same grade general education classes and other inclusive settings within the student's neighborhood school, the school they would attend if they did not have a disability. Let's put it that way. And the third one is that everything we do is going to be student-centered, strengths-based approaches for inclusive education, and that those occur within general education curriculum, the classes, the lessons, the activities, and routines. So everything is within general education context. Specially designed instruction that occurs within the general education instruction, classes, activities, and routines. Should be seeing a mantra here. And that the barriers to inclusive education exist within the systems and environments, not within the student or staff. That's really difficult for people to grasp, but if there's an issue, we need to look at the system, we need to look at the environment and figure out what we need to do to support a student. Any questions on the framework?
It's not a question, but I just wanted to point out Celise Heron, and I hope I said that right, said barriers to inclusive education exist within systems and environments, not within students or staff. And if you're doing any work on universal design for learning, that type of focus should feel very familiar to you.
Okay. Next slide.
Sorry,
So
the other interpreter recently joined really late, so I'm trying to replace the interpreter that's been working, if that's okay.
Yep, go
Okay.
for it.
Okay, thanks.
We'll continue to go. So to use the RISE, and we're going to talk about it at the district level. You could do this at the school level, you could do it at the state level. But we're going to talk about the district level because, as you all know, making changes in one school or a few schools does not mean that those changes are going to be sustained once those principals leave. It needs to be embedded within the district policies, procedures, and so forth. So it takes, doing a district RISE, doing a RISE takes about 1.5 days or 3 half days. In part one, part one takes approximately 1/2 day, and we're going to focus. We'll talk through that in a second, but it's looking at, it's focusing on the whole area of features. And then once we get through part one, you go to part two, which is dictated based on what you did with part one. And we'll talk through these. And then the 3rd half day is useful for taking all that information and developing an action plan. Next phase, next slide, please. So let's talk about those four. There are four areas that we ended up grouping all of the research-based practices into so that they could be discussed collectively. For part one of the RISE, we take a look at all four of those areas, those focus areas, with kind of like a broad brushstroke. So you can see here, RISE Part 1, it provides the team with the opportunity to reflect on and discuss the big ideas of inclusive education. And they're organized around these four areas. After we talk about them, then the team comes back and identifies usually one, sometimes two, focus areas. Next slide. So in doing that, looking at the four broad areas, focus area 1 is placement and settings. It describes policies and practices that are essential to placement in neighborhood schools and in general education classes. And also is essential to accessing all of the instruction, all the curricular activities, extracurricular activities for students both with and without disabilities. So it's both the placement of the student, but then providing access to what is happening in those placements for all students. Next slide. Here's what it looks like in the process. Part 1, the group gets together and we read, I'm just going to read A up here. To what extent does your district mission and vision statements and mindset drive placement for students with extensive support needs in their neighborhood schools and general education classes for 80% or more of the day? You can tell within the bolded areas, the other things, other features, there are sets of features that look at A. There are sets of features that look at all district education leaders and what their role is in doing this. The evidence-based practices that all of the district policies and procedures support those practices, that the district personnel practices ensure that the right people are there. And then the last one is to evaluate, monitor, and improve technical assistance with coaching. Again, at the district level, what does the district do to do that? Each of those is discussed as kind of like just overall, what does this mean? What does D mean? And how do you interpret that? And then the group is asked to think about and talk about what their services look like in relation to those sets of features. Once they've done that, then if you look at the rating part on the right-hand column, the group is asked to individually and sort of quietly, confidentially, score or rate their own services in relation to these features, starting with that some of these features are in place for some students, but they're not in place yet for students with extensive support needs, all the way through a 5, which is that all of the features are there for all students, including all students with significant extensive support needs. So keep going to the next slide. Focus area 2 deals with everything related to general education curriculum content and access to that content. It describes evidence-based practices that regarding both the content of instruction and the conditions that enable access to instruction on that content for all students, especially students with extensive support needs. This includes both the general education standards, the general education curriculum, as well as prioritized what we're calling embedded essential skills. It's all those things that we think about with communication and behavior and mobility and so forth. Go to the next slide. Again, the same idea. Think about what these bold areas are and think about the broad areas related to access to the general education curriculum. And the district then needs the district team needs to, again, rate themselves related to how their services, the extent to which their services reflect those features. Next one. The third focus area is about instructional practices. In this area describes evidence-based methods and characteristics of instruction for students with extensive support needs within general education classes lessons, activities, and routines. It includes, but it's not limited to these 5 things: individualized curriculum adaptation, positive behavioral support, communicative competence, teaching for generalization, and systematic instruction. Go to the next slide. I'm just giving you the sense again of the team goes through each of these. They discuss A through F separately, and then discuss their own services and the extent to which these are demonstrated within their services. Again, rating themselves 1 through 5. Next one. I'm going through these quickly. If you've got questions on them, I'm trying to give you an idea of just what the 4 main areas are. Debbie, I need the next slide. So focus area 4 deals with both student outcomes and system outcomes. It describes structures and processes that reflect a unified approach to state, district, and school administration. It includes, but it's not limited to, unified approaches to scheduling, personnel allocations and hiring, assignment of roles and responsibilities, transportation, finances and budgeting related to equitable inclusive practices, and use of multi-tiered systems of support. Next slide. Again, you have here A through E. Each of these is discussed to be certain people understand the concepts, the ideas, and then they score themselves and how they align to how their services align with those features. So you have those 4 sets of features, and we're calling them focus areas. The group then talks about each of those 4 areas and thinks about where they are in relation to their own services, and they pick one of those 4 areas. I'm going to, for the sake of this, I'm going to pick focus area 1, which is placement and settings. So this is taking a deep dive into very specific and individualized practices that really need to be in place across the board. Everything from policies and hiring to monitoring to what's going on. You'll notice each of these bolded areas relate back to what you saw in phase 1 related to placement and settings, mission and vision statements, mindset, the district leadership, the actual placement of students, and so forth, and then what's happening in those settings and so forth. Next slide.
And I'm going to interrupt for one quick second, just to say, one of the things that is different about the RISE than some other tools is in using that implementation science triangle that we shared with you with the different drivers. Those are embedded into every single one of these focus areas. So you have to think about mindset. You have to think about how you're going to coach people. You have to think about what your resources are. All of those pieces are together in each focus area. One of the questions, Diane, is how do you get a district to even engage in this process?
That's a really interesting question, an important question, because that becomes, to me, it's one of the barriers that we have to figure out how to get across. Yeah. Whether they're being mandated to do something from the feds because of the monitoring that's been happening in their state or in their or within their state. For example, there are some states where they have more than 1% of their students counted as being making progress on alternate assessments. It's like, well, states are now being called on that, and some of the states that we're working with, some of the districts are being called on that specifically. And in order to do that, you have to look at the bigger system. So having some of those discussions between the State Department of Education and some of the district leaders and the district leadership becomes important. Sometimes we've got parents in districts who are fighting for this and obviously go into due process hearings and so forth. So there are districts who are saying, yeah, we have to do this because clearly we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then we have other districts where either the principal or the director of special education is saying, we need to be doing this. Why aren't we? And they kind of take the ball and run with it. It's not easy. I mean, neither one of us is saying this is easy. And we have to say it's very messy and muddy. And you're also trying to balance everything between policies and procedures to what does that look like in classes, and how do you give people the expertise they need in order to do this? But then you have to have a structure in place for them to use that expertise. And then you've got to be able to monitor that and figure out, is this really making a difference for our kids? So it's really, it's not simple, but it's necessary. And I'm going to show my age here. Honestly, I'm so tired of doing things one kid at a time
We don't have
or
time.
one school at a time. It doesn't work. And after almost 50 years, our kids are still not there where they need to be in general education settings and with implementation of these practices. So I've stopped doing, honestly, the one kid, the one school at a time. The smallest unit I'll now go and work with is a district, because at least the district can deal with their own policies and procedures within their state framework. I'd love it when it's a state department, some districts and schools within those districts, because you really need to demonstrate and look at what is the barrier to this school implementing something. Is it a school issue? Is it a district issue? Or is it a state issue? So that the multiple levels really, to me, is really important, which is partially why we did this. Debbie?
I was just going to say, you're getting a lot of amens and yeses on that one, on system change being needed. Somebody's saying that they're dealing with a county where every single school is its own district, and she works for the county. So managing those relationships as a one-person department is exhausting. Of course it is.
Of course it is. And I've never heard of that before. And that might be something that needs to be looked at a little differently with it. Now, there is site-based management that a lot of the districts use, where the principals get to manage their own site, but they're still part of a district that has guidelines and so forth to get them involved with. If anybody wants to talk about these things at a different time, please let us know. Happy to do that. I need to go on to here before Debbie cuts me off, though. In phase 2 part 2 of the RISE, in focus area 1, we just want to show you what this discussion looks like first. Let's go to the next slide, Debbie. In this part 2 of this, each one of these, we go round robin with members and basically say, okay, Debbie, you're going to read this one. I'm Debbie now. To what extent does your district-wide system facilitate placement in general education classes with communication and collaboration across all personnel and departments, indicating that placement in gen ed classes is expected? It should be across the district. That's a typo, another typo, across the district. So it's like every school in the district should have this. To what extent does your district facilitate that? And talk about that. What does that mean? Where do you go from there? And then the next person actually will read this. To what extent does your district-wide facilitate this with collective responsibility and collaborative decision-making? And you can read the rest. So we talk about each one of these. What does it mean? And then after you get through all 9 of these under 1.4, again, people get to score. Rate their district on the extent to which their services reflect everything that's in here under 1.4. From 1 with, yeah, it's happening for some kids, but not our kids yet, to it's there for every kid. So I'm going to hand off to Debbie, who's going to talk about the process that is used to actually get through this, and go from there.
That's fantastic. Diane, you may want to peruse the
I'm
chat.
doing that.
There's a lot of great things happening there. For those who are not looking at the chat, just to let you know, I've put our contact information. We will try to answer all the questions during this, either through the chat or through our conversation this way. But we've put our emails in there so that if you have additional ones, we can follow up. So Diane outlined oh, sorry.
No, I thought you were asking me to do something. Forget it. Sorry.
Diane outlined kind of the big picture of how this works. She talked a little bit about the process. I'm going to go into it a little bit more. So the first thing that we usually do is we introduce who we're talking about. We build our norms of collaboration. We share research and stories related to inclusive education, and we outline the process. One of the things we'd like to do is show a video of a student with a significant cognitive disability or extensive support need to show them what is possible. What does this look like? And again, I love the videos on the TIES Center website of science. They're my favorite because I helped make them, but they really do illustrate how all students can be included together in one general education class, working toward the same work, but having different achievement expectations. So when we do this, a lot of people have no experience with this. And so they need to be able to see it in some way in order to have these conversations. Our norms of collaboration are adapted from the 7 norms of collaboration. One of the ones that we add in here is the Vegas rule. What happens in this meeting stays in this meeting. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So we want everybody to know that this is a safe place. We are not here to judge anything. We're not here to say, oh, this teacher's the one who's the problem, or this is why we struggle in terms of this one person. It's instead looking at, as a system, where are we? And that's hard, especially as you get to the school level. We've found teachers are very careful about making sure that everybody understands that they appreciate the work that's being done in their school. So being able to then say, and we think it could be moved up a notch, feels awkward to some people. So we have to remind them, we're not just talking about the people in our meeting right now and on our leadership team. We're talking about your whole school. We're talking about your whole district. We're talking about your whole state, depending on which level of the RISE you're doing. And that helps to kind of get people to see this is not about a single person. This is not about a single student. This is about our system. So we go through the 4 focus areas, similar to what Diane did. We assure people that, as they do this and use this frame of reference, they're going to have a lot of conversations, and there are no right answers. Diane showed you they go through the rating. What we tend to do is everybody has a card, and when they have to do the rating,
they have a set of cards.
Yes. Yeah. So when they do their rating, their card, they can pick the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whichever one of those cards they think fits. And we do the 1, 2, 3 flip kind of idea where they all hold it up at once. And we take a look at where everybody is. We then have the conversations about, well, this person was a 1 and this person was a 5. What kept you from being a 2? The 1, why did you choose that? Or the 5 person, why did you choose that? And it really is amazing to me how often those conversations lead to people seeing how disconnected their work is from each other. Oh, I never knew that was the case. I never knew that you guys did that. I didn't know that was happening. Having those conversations is really key. We then come to consensus. And again, it's not about we have to be a 5. This is what we want. it's about having the conversations. You know, nobody's going to come back to you in a week, in a month, in a year, in 2 years and say, let's do this again and compare your two scores. Because what you know about inclusive education changes. So you may have thought that you were a 4, but after this process and a year or 2 of working on it, you're thinking, wow, we were really a 2 back then, but now we're solidly a 4. The scores don't matter in the sense of they get used to evaluate a piece. What matters is the conversations, and forcing you to choose a score is what makes those conversations happen.
I just want to emphasize that, Debbie.
Yeah.
And refer back to when we started this work to figure out what needed to be in the tools.
Yeah.
We did those searches and we looked at all the research and we looked at the textbooks and we looked at like 30 different tools that have been out there for years and used in different ways.
Yeah.
They're faster, they're quicker. This is not a fast and quick tool to use. It has to be built within the systems change process that everybody is committed to. But it was the only way that we could think about saying, this is the gold standard. This is really what we should be seeing in our classes and in our schools. So getting people to buy into a bigger process and to devote the time and energy to do it and do it well, even just doing these tools well, you're changing mindsets just by doing that.
Yeah.
Deeper understanding.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point, because as we know, you guys said it in the chat, mindset is so key to this work, and it doesn't happen overnight. This starts that conversation. It starts those little seeds in people's heads of, oh, maybe this is possible, or wow, I've been thinking about it this way. Maybe I need to shift a little, and it takes time. So we'll go through placement and settings. This is what the whole thing looks like. And then what we do is they choose from, after doing all 4 of those stage 1 pieces, they choose one area to dig deeper into. And it has different features. They're more in depth. There's more of them. We're really talking you dig down deep. And you'll notice when you look at the RISE, which is on the TIES website, you'll notice that focus area 1, placement and settings, has to include information about system and student outcomes. It has to include information about general education content access. It just is not the focus of it. So even if you do one focus area in depth, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring everything else. It just means that's the lens you're using to really dig into your work. And you can see they get much more in depth than in part 2, right? Communication and collaboration, collective responsibility, collective decision-making. Having that conversation in and of itself is such a novel thing for people. What do you mean that I'm responsible for kids with extensive support needs grades? No, that's what the special ed teacher does. You know, that's not my job. Those kinds of pieces are really critical to shifting how people are thinking about things. Are they assigned to gen ed classes prior to other students? That scheduling piece. Are students with their age and grade level peers for 80% of the school day? Are those classes natural proportions of students with and without disabilities based on your community? Trying to have an inclusion classroom that is half students with extensive support needs and half gen ed is not going to be very effective. Do you want to jump in, Diane?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Absolutely.
Thinking about your IEP goals. Do those goals include strategies for increasing the time that students are going to be in gen ed classes? Because remember, our IEPs are not our curriculum. IEPs are the pieces, the structures that students need to access and make progress in the curriculum, as well as those essential embedded skills. We have you looking at cultural and linguistic relevance of the family resources, looking at community-based learning opportunities, and progress through the grades. All of that is just one feature or one set within this focus area. And I think each focus area has about 7 to 10, depending on the focus area. So there's a lot to really dig into and go through. From there, oh, let me pause there and check the chat and see where everybody is. There is only one set of curriculum. Yes, thank you. Are OTs and SLP skill sets used to enable placement in Gen Ed rather than using services as a reason for placement in segregated settings? Great question. And one of the things that we recommend is that on your leadership team, you have at least one service provider. OT, we've done a lot with the SLPs or with assistive tech because some of our students don't have access to a communication system or don't know how to use one fully yet. And so we want to make sure that those students are getting what they need. And that can be really key to the success for some of these students.
I just want to, I put in there that there's only one set of standards, only one curriculum. That's become a real issue in states and in the districts we're working with, because they think about curriculum, the general education curriculum, and we keep coming back to standards. The curriculum is what you use to teach the standards. So there's only one set of standards. And if they begin to use alternate curricula for our students, that automatically sets up the argument that, well, we can't take this student and teach them what they need from their IEP in general education settings because they're not teaching this stuff.
Right.
It's like, well, that's right. And so you shouldn't be using those curricula. We need to be thinking about what are the general education standards, that are being taught and through what types of activities, and how do we accommodate for our students so that they're learning some, if not all, of that content. Different mindset.
And for those who will push back, because that is a really hard shift for some people, there's some research out there, not a ton, but there is some research out there looking at the what are supposed to be supplemental curricula to show whether or not they're actually, or to what degree they're aligned with the general education standards. Looking at that, it's really telling. So one of the things we wanted to share with you guys was the experience of this particular teacher. She's a special ed teacher, and I will let her kind of speak for herself for the next seconds.
I think that taking the time to build that understanding and build that shared vision is what has made it more successful than I've seen in many other settings, because I've been in every building in the county working itinerant for 15 years. And so I know what it usually looks like, and it doesn't usually look like this.
So she was in one of our schools that really shifted their practice. I just finished looking at all of their data, so it's kind of stuck in my head right now. They went from having students included for about 33 to 40% of the day to included for 60 to 80% of the day. But the other thing you saw were huge changes in the level of work they were doing. I'm going to stop sharing for just one quick second so I can show you this. Whoops, I didn't mean to stop sharing, but now I'll share again and share something different. It'll be good. So one of the things that, and I don't know if Kate is on here, but she said she was coming to this thing, so she might want to jump in. One of the things this district did was really look at their content. They had a curriculum director for the Gen Ed working with them and working on science. So that's what I'm going to show you. And really thinking about what is the most important thing that students need to do and know from this. So you can see students went from doing things where they were really just coloring, looking at sight words, things like that, to the nervous system. And this was their assessment, dragging the circles over to the parts of the organ that make up the nervous system. What are those cells called? It's not as in-depth as the gen ed students assessment, clearly. It doesn't cover as much, but these were the pieces that they felt were most important. So they have this across every science class in middle school and some social studies. One of the things that I wanted to show you was that we have, I'm going to show you some of the social studies stuff so you can see when they change things, they change it only as much as necessary to make it accessible. So for instance, this is the special education piece about the leaders of Byzantine. The gen ed one looks very similar. And I won't go through and try to find it for you, but it looks very similar. When they're talking about samurais, the materials look very similar. Their projects were the same as everybody else's. They made a poster and had to do a presentation about it. As much as possible, things were as close as possible to each other. And one of the things,
I'm sorry, I'm just going to, what Debbie was just showing you
Yeah.
were resources that were developed in one school district,
Right.
starting with in one school, one subject area, and then they started to pull that together and make them accessible to everybody in the school district.
Yeah, and that's a good point. They also shifted how they shared resources with teachers. As a district, they said we shouldn't be having a special ed folder and a gen ed folder. We should have a science folder. We should have a social studies folder, and everything should be in that. So Diane's right. This was a district-wide piece from one, and I'm showing you one piece of that, but yeah, it's a district-wide look. And they now have people working on it across the district. They're doing social studies. I think they did social studies last year. And then this year they're looking at, I think, English language. But one of the things we found was that when you compare the work in the implementation schools, the ones that had gotten a little further in their work with inclusive practices, to those who were just starting, there was less need for adaptations, because the teachers were using universal design for learning to build the work from the beginning to be accessible to as many students as possible. So that concern of, well, who's going to have the time to make modifications? You still need some of that, absolutely. And especially at the beginning, you need a lot of that. But as the teachers learned these skills and these practices, their need to have things modified really decreased.
Just wanted to respond a little bit to Nicole's question about looking at the staffing barriers and not just getting the right people, but then how do you justify you have a teacher for X number of students with extensive support needs, but those students are in general education classes. So when you start to think about how minutes are counted and whether minutes are direct contact or whether minutes are part of consulting, part of facilitating inclusive services in a general education class, I mean, it takes, you're back to policies and procedures that need to be rethought about how do you justify personnel, how do you assign them, what are their roles? And as long as I'm, as a special education teacher, as long as I'm assigned to a self-contained classroom, it's really hard for me to get out of there and to support a student who is in a general education class. So what do we need to do, in terms of policies and accountability to make that all feasible so that all kids are getting what they need?
Right.
They're
And-
not easy answers. It's a great
Yeah.
question, Nicole.
And to piggyback on that, one of the things we found doing multi-level work was that what the state thought they were putting out there was not at all what the teachers or the districts understood their message to be, right? So the state was saying, well, this is how you have to do specially designed instruction. And the teachers in the district were saying, well, that means we have to do it all over here by themselves, one-on-one or in small groups. There's no way they can be in gen ed. And the state was like, no, that's not what we meant at all. So that's why, another reason why that connection across or through the levels is so vital, because often we've found that states are like, yeah, we're doing this. I don't know why my teachers aren't. And yet the teachers are saying they can't because of the state policies or the district policies. So it's important to have that. So what follows are a couple of quotes from different people who went through the RISE process. Some of them went through it multiple times because they were on the state and district level or district and school level. And so this person, I'm going to let you read it yourself, but I'll give you time to do that. Okay. And then this was a district supervisor. She was talking about the action plan that they built. One of the things that we found is that that action plan, when it's tied to the RISE and that reflection, has so much more power to it than when people just try to make an action plan based on what they think the next steps are of systems change. It has to be embedded within your context. That ownership of the work, the school investment, the teacher investment, the administrator investment is absolutely key to all of this. So I'm going to stop sharing because for real this time and check out the chat. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I know we have time for questions and you guys have tons of them in the chat. So Diane, I'll let you get started and I'll catch up.
I was actually responding to thought it was the end. No, to Heather, sorry. While it's an issue about what goes on the IEP, what it looks like in terms of minutes, in terms of placement, it's so wrapped up into also how teachers' roles are defined and the procedures that and policies that are used by a state department and the district in how they justify the teacher allocations, the OT-PT, and speech language pathologist allocations. So I wish I had a list that said that, but I don't have that. And I don't know anybody who has that yet. It's I'm feeling like we're just finally getting to the point with districts where they're understanding the need to address that, because we can now give them examples of how the way they're doing it is actually hurting their kids and not getting services to kids. So I wish I had a different answer for that. Sorry.
I can just throw in this little piece, which is related service providers shifting, and somebody else mentioned it here too, shifting where they're providing services and how can be a big part of this. Instead of talking about, we're going to do this activity or we're going to reach this goal, talking about how it's embedded in the classroom, routines or instruction, then gives you the option of having that related service provider come into the classroom, be part of that. And it also teaches the special and general education teachers what support is needed for that student related to speech or related to occupational therapy or PT, and lets them continue it across time when that related service provider can't be there.
And then you start to think about, well, then how do you count minutes of OT? Because they're not just getting it from the OT. Right. They're getting it from the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher. They're getting it in some cases from peers who are supporting students. It's like, how we think about that and document that? It's an issue. It's a system issue. It's not a child issue.
Yeah. And then in terms of how do you help teachers learn to modify general education curriculum, another resource on the TIE Center website is called the 5-15-45. And we designed it with the idea and the information we had that said teachers didn't have a ton of time for planning. I know, we're shocked. They had 5 minutes, they had 15 minutes, once in a while they had 45 minutes. And so what were the questions that the general and special education teacher needed to answer together to be able to start to adapt some of that work? It's not a step-by-step, this is how you do it. It's more of a process of thinking it through. Because in the past, I've taught the step-by-step piece, you know, first you do this and then you do this and you look for this, and it's just not effective. Instead, people have to embed that thought process into their brains.
We're coming up on the end of our time shortly. I think I just want to reiterate the piece of focusing on or deciding whether or not you're going to focus on one student, one school, one team, one district, and how you spend your time and energy. What we frequently find from district people who are supposed to be helping develop inclusive services is that they spend 90% of their time putting out fires rather than taking the time to be proactive and to think through what are the systemic issues that need to be addressed and how do we address them. So somehow stepping back and thinking about our own roles and how we spend our time, to me, that becomes a variable that we all need to look at, because you can't do the big system stuff if you're putting out fires all the time and don't have the time to sit and think and figure out, you know, get all the people together and collaborate and strategically plan how you're going to get where you want to be.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, it was so great to have you all here. Thank you, Fresno. Thank you, California. Hope the weather's nice.
You are fantastic. Thank you so much. I know you saw all the excitement in the chat, and Celeste and I were trying to keep up with just commenting back and just really excited to see all of the engagement. So thank you to the amazing Debbie and Diane and everyone in attendance today for your allyship to our students with disabilities and their families. It is our mission to grow our educational system to innovate, include, and impact outcomes for all. We know that you are all going to leave this session and do that. So next, just a reminder that the presentation slides and resources can be accessed in the session description section on the VFAIRS agenda page. And you are going to be dismissed to lunch, but please join us for the next breakout session and our closing keynote that you will not want to miss today. So thank you again to our presenters, our interpreter, our translator, and all of you here as accomplices and allies in inclusion. I am so glad that you just kept emphasizing mindset and systems, and that's exactly where it is. It is not a student readiness model, right? We got to get it together as adults. So thank you for sharing your tools, your expertise, and your time with us today. And we hope you all have a great lunch, fuel up for the second part of the day.